"Get out," the manager said, not even looking up. "We don't hire runaways." Emily Carter stood in the doorway of Blackstone Garage, her hands shaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a runaway. I just need $40 a day. I'll clean everything. I won't cause trouble." He finally looked at her, then laughed. "Kid, you have no idea where you just walked into. If you've never had a door slammed in your face so many times that you stopped flinching, you need to watch this story to the end. Subscribe to our channel and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." The car smelled like fast food wrappers and desperation. Emily Carter had been living out of a 2004 Honda Civic for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. She knew the exact count because she marked each morning in a small spiral notebook she kept wedged between the driver's seat and the center console. The same notebook where she used to write down homework assignments back when she still went to school, back when she still had somewhere to go home to after. She was 17 years old, and she had learned in those 4 months that desperation had a smell. It was something between damp fabric and exhaustion. It lived in your clothes, and no matter how many times you washed them in gas station bathrooms. It followed you into every room you walked into and introduced itself before you could say a word. She had applied at 14 places in the past 3 weeks. A diner on Route 9, a laundromat 2 miles east of the highway, a grocery store that smelled like bleach and canned peaches, a motel with a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Help wanted," but apparently didn't mean it when a teenage girl with no references and no permanent address walked through the door. Every time the answer was some variation of the same sentence. "We're not hiring right now. You need more experience. You have to be 18. You need a parent or guardian to co-sign. You need a work permit. You need an address. You need. What no one ever said, but what Emily heard underneath every single refusal was, "You don't belong anywhere we're willing to be responsible for." She had parked the night before in the lot behind a Dollar General on the edge of town, far enough from the streetlights that no one would notice her, close enough to a bathroom she could use before the store opened at 7. She ate the last of a package of peanut butter crackers she'd bought 3 days ago and washed it down with water from a bottle she'd refilled at a gas station sink. Then she opened the notebook and looked at the list she'd made. There were 3 names left with question marks beside them. The first 2 she'd already decided against. A bar on the south side that had a hand-lettered sign asking for a dishwasher, but the man who'd leaned out the back door when she knocked had looked at her in a way that made her stomach lock up tight. The second was a car dealership that wanted someone to detail vehicles on weekends, but they'd asked for a social security card and a school ID, and she'd lost both somewhere in the chaos of the last 4 months and hadn't figured out how to replace them yet without a permanent address to mail the replacements to. The third name on the list was Blackstone Garage. She had written it down because she'd seen a handwritten index card taped to a telephone pole outside the gas station where she sometimes bought 50-cent cups of coffee. The card said, "Help wanted, cleaning, daily pay, ask for tank," and below that an address. But when she'd mentioned it to the woman at the gas station counter, an older woman named Darlene, who had been kind enough to let Emily use the outlet behind the register to charge her phone without making a thing of it, Darlene had given her a long look. "Blackstone," Darlene had said slowly, like she was testing the weight of the word. "Honey, you don't want to go there." "Why not?" "Because that's not a place for a girl like you." Emily had almost asked what kind of girl she was exactly, but she'd heard enough variations of that answer to know it wouldn't give her anything useful. Instead, she'd said, "Is it dangerous?" Darlene had hesitated. "It's bikers. You know, that kind of crowd." "What kind, but?" "Oh, the kind people cross the street to avoid." Emily had folded the index card and put it in her pocket. She hadn't thrown it away. That was 2 days ago. Now she sat in the Civic in the early morning with the notebook open to that third name and thought about what she actually had to lose. The honest answer was not much. The car needed an oil change she couldn't afford. She had $11 and some change in the zippered pocket of her backpack. She hadn't eaten a real meal, something hot, something that didn't come from a vending machine or a gas station rack in 5 days. Her left rear tire was slow leaking, and she was putting air in it every other morning at the station on the corner hoping it held. She was 17 years old and she was out of options, and she was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She started the car. Blackstone Garage sat at the end of a service road off the main highway, set back from the street behind a chain-link fence with a rolling gate that was standing open when Emily pulled up. She could hear the sound before she even parked, the deep, rhythmic sound of pneumatic tools, the clang of metal. Something classic on a radio somewhere playing so low it was more like texture than music. The building itself was large and plain. Corrugated metal walls, two oversized bay doors both open, a gravel lot that held half a dozen vehicles in various states of repair, and 4 motorcycles lined up along the fence with a kind of careful order that surprised her. She'd expected chaos, and instead, what she saw was organization. Everything in its place. Even the oil stains on the concrete floor looked intentional. She sat in the car for a long moment. Then she got out. She was halfway across the gravel when a man came out of the first bay, wiping his hands on a red shop rag, and stopped when he saw her. He was big. Not just tall big in the way that takes up space before you even fully register the dimensions. She guessed he was somewhere north of 6 feet broad through the shoulders in a way that made his sleeveless leather vest look like it was working to contain him rather than just cover him. He had gray at his temples and a full beard going silver at the jaw, and his forearms, which were crossed now as he looked at her, were covered in ink that she couldn't make out from this distance, but which seemed to move when his muscles shifted. He didn't say anything, just looked at her. She made herself keep walking. "I saw your sign," she said, "the one on the telephone pole, about the cleaning job." He didn't respond immediately, just studied her the way she imagined a man studied a car that had been brought in with an unknown problem, methodically without judgment, just taking in data. "How old are you?" And he said. It wasn't quite a question. 17. Something moved across his face, not quite a frown. "You got parents?" "No." "Guardians?" "No." He looked at her for another beat. "You know what this place is? A garage." "People say more than that about it." "I know what people say," Emily told him. "I also know I'm down to $11 and my back tire is going flat." He looked past her at the Civic, looked back at her. $40 a day, he said. On 6 hours. You clean the bathrooms, sweep the bays, take out trash, whatever else needs doing. You don't touch tools, you don't get in the way when we're working, and you don't ask questions about things that aren't your business. Emily felt something shift in her chest, a loosening like a fist that had been clenched for months had just relaxed one finger. "Okay," she said. "You eat," she blinked. "What? Are you eating regular meals?" She didn't answer, which was an answer. He nodded once like that confirmed something. "There's a refrigerator in the back. It's got food in it. You're allowed to use it." He turned back toward the bay. "I'm Tank. You need anything, find me." His real name, she would learn later, was Victor Hale, but no one called him that. He had been Tank since before most of the men in the garage could remember, which meant it had been long enough that the original story had blurred into legend. There were at least 3 different versions, and each teller believed his was true. What was consistent across all of them was this: Victor Hale was not a man who did things halfway. The garage operated with the kind of structured routine that Emily hadn't encountered anywhere outside of her 3rd grade classroom, which had been run by a woman named Mrs. Patton, who believed that chaos was a choice and that children were capable of more discipline than most adults gave them credit for. Blackstone Garage operated on similar principles. There was a schedule, there were expectations, there were consequences for cutting corners, and there were very specific ways things were done that had nothing to do with rules posted on a wall and everything to do with the culture that had built up inside those corrugated metal walls over years of men working alongside each other. The first person she met after Tank was Ryder Cole. He was younger than the others, she guessed late 20s, maybe 30, with a lean build and dark eyes and the particular kind of quietness that comes not from shyness, but from choosing words carefully. He was working on a transmission when she came in with the mop the first morning, and he glanced up without making it a production. "I'm Ryder," he said. "Emily. You need anything? I'm usually somewhere around here." He turned back to the transmission. Then as she started mopping, he said without looking up, "There's a sandwich in the top drawer of the red toolbox over there. Made an extra by accident. It'll just go bad." She stopped mopping. "I'm fine." "Probably, but the sandwich isn't." She got the sandwich. He pretended not to notice. That was Ryder's way, she would come to understand. He helped people in ways that preserved their dignity, structured it so you weren't receiving charity, but solving a logistical problem. The sandwich wasn't about her being hungry. It was about waste. He was consistent about it, and it was consistent enough that it took her almost 2 weeks to recognize it for what it was. The second person was Grizzly Mason. She heard him before she saw him, a voice like gravel in a blender coming from somewhere under a lifted pickup truck. He rolled out from beneath it on a creeper board when she was sweeping. The second bay looked at her and said, "You the new cleaning girl?" "Yes, sir." There was a pause. "Don't call me sir. Makes me feel like I owe someone money." He rolled back under the truck. "Watch where you sweep. Don't kick dust toward the engine bays." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, just do it right." He was enormous, taller than Tank by an inch or two, and with a quality of mass that seemed structural, rather than just physical, like he'd been engineered for load-bearing. His beard reached his collarbone. His hands, when he'd been propped up on the creeper board, were the size of dinner plates and black with grease to the wrists. He said almost nothing to her for the first week, but she noticed in the way you notice things when you're quiet and watching that he always positioned himself between her and the bay doors when someone unfamiliar came in. Not obviously, just there suddenly between her and the entrance, like a wall that had been waiting for a reason. Danny Brooks she didn't trust at first. He was medium height, compact, with a sharp face and a quicker mouth than anyone else in the garage, and his default mode was a sarcasm so well worn it had the texture of reflex rather than intention. "Let me guess," he said the first time he actually spoke to her rather than past her. "You're here because you thought a biker garage sounded safer than the other options." "Something like that." Solid reasoning. He looked at her sideways. "You know how to work a mop, or do we need to review the basics?" "I know how to work a mop." "Good, because Grizzly has the floor cleaning standards of a hospital, and if you're not thorough enough, he'll make a face that'll haunt you." She almost smiled. Almost. Danny's sarcasm, she figured out slowly, was a kind of language, a way of saying things that mattered without making them matter too much. When he brought her coffee, without asking how she took it, then watched until she took a sip to see her expression so he could gauge the adjustment, for next time he did it with a running commentary about the inferior coffee situation in America that was so relentless, it covered the fact that he was paying attention to her preferences. When she showed up one morning limping slightly because the back seat she'd been sleeping in had given her a crick in her lower back, and he appeared 40 minutes later with a foam camping pad that he set against the wall near the refrigerator and said casually, "Leaving this here, whoever needs it can have it." He was gone before she could respond. She understood after a while that the running commentary was armor, for all of them in different forms. The first 2 weeks were about surviving the learning curve. The garage had a rhythm to it that she absorbed gradually, the way you absorb a language when you live inside it rather than studying it. She learned which bays were for which kinds of work. She learned that the refrigerator in the back had an unspoken allocation system, certain shelves for certain people, and the bottom shelf she gradually realized was quietly stocked for her use specifically, though no one ever said so. She learned that there was a code of behavior inside the garage that operated without ever being spoken aloud. You did your work. You didn't complain about things you could fix. You didn't ask questions about things that weren't your business. You showed up when you said you'd show up. And if you saw someone struggling with something, you went and helped without making it a conversation. She was still sleeping in the car. Tank knew. She hadn't told him she hadn't told anyone. But Tank was the kind of man who noticed the things people didn't say, and she suspected he had known from the first day. On the 8th day, he appeared at the back of the garage where she was taking her lunch break, a sandwich from the refrigerator, the bottom shelf, and said without preamble, "There's a storage room off the back, got a cot in it from when Ryder was rehabbing a knee and needed a place to rest between sessions. It's yours if you want it." She looked at him. "No conditions," he said. "It's a room with a cot. There's a lock on the inside of the door and the key is yours." He put a single key on the table next to her sandwich. "Up to you." He walked away before she could say anything. That night, she moved the foam pad and her backpack into the storage room and lay on the cot in the dark and felt for the first time in 4 months and 3 weeks and some odd days that there was a wall between her and everything outside. A real wall, not a car door, not glass. She cried for about 20 minutes and then she stopped because she was too tired to continue, and then she slept for 11 straight hours. The thing about trauma Emily had figured out somewhere in the middle of the worst months was that it made you a very good reader of rooms. You got attuned to threat in a way that most people never had to be. You cataloged exits. You noticed when someone's voice changed pitch in a way that suggested something coming. You read the tension in a room the way other people read words automatically without deciding to. At Blackstone Garage, the reading was confusing because the signals she was picking up were ones she didn't have categories for. The men here were rough in the way of men who had lived rough lives. They used language that would make her high school principal have a stroke. They had histories she could only partially guess at and didn't ask about. There was a leather vest with patches that Tank always wore, and she knew enough to understand what the patches meant in the broad sense, even if she didn't know the specifics. She knew these weren't men the local chamber of commerce was having over for lunch. And yet, no one looked at her the way the man at the bar had looked at her when she'd knocked on the back door. No one made her feel like she was a problem to be solved in a particular way. No one took advantage of the fact that she was young and alone and had no one who would know if something happened to her. Instead, they corrected her when she swept wrong. They told her without softening it when she hadn't cleaned something thoroughly enough. Tank gave her a written list of her responsibilities the second day typed out on actual paper, which she appreciated because it was concrete expectations she could measure herself against. Ryder showed her without making a thing of it the correct way to organize cleaning supplies, so they were accessible and didn't create a hazard. Grizzly told her once that she had left a wet mop standing in a corner and that standing a wet mop was how you got mold in the head, and she should lay it flat, and she did, and he nodded, and that was the end of it. Discipline and structure. She hadn't had either in so long that receiving them felt like a foreign language she was slowly translating in real time. The days accumulated. The $40 accumulated. She kept it in the zippered pocket of her backpack, carefully counted and recounted. She got the back tire fixed at a garage 2 miles away. A proper patch job, $7. She bought food, real food, and kept it on the bottom shelf of the refrigerator and ate actual meals. The crick in her back went away. She stopped waking up at every sound. She was still watching, still calculating, still waiting somewhere into the back of her mind for the catch. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in her third week. She had been sweeping the far end of the second bay when she heard raised voices from the first, not the normal volume of men working and talking loudly over equipment, but the specific cadence of a problem being argued about. She kept sweeping because not inserting yourself into things that weren't your business was one of the rules she had absorbed fully, but the voices didn't drop. She heard Tank say, "It's the injector timing." A second voice, unfamiliar, someone from outside the garage, she thought. That's what the last place said. They replaced the injectors and it's still doing it. Because it's not the injectors, it's the timing sensor feeding bad data to the fuel management system. So you're telling me the last shop's diagnosis was wrong. I'm telling you the symptom is the same, but the cause isn't. There was a silence. Then because she couldn't stop herself, because she had been watching these men work for 3 weeks and had been absorbing information the way she'd always absorbed things without quite meaning to, without anyone realizing, Emily stopped sweeping. She walked to the doorway of the first bay. Tank was standing with a man in a suit, both of them looking at a late model truck on the lift. The truck had the slightly defeated quality of something that had been to multiple shops and hadn't been fixed. She said, "If it's giving rough idle at low RPM but smooth at highway speed, and the code reader is throwing a lean mixture code, it's probably the crankshaft position sensor, not the timing sensor. The timing sensor error is downstream. The crank sensor is causing the misread." Both men looked at her. She became aware of how that had sounded and took a step back. "Sorry, I've been watching how you diagnose things. I didn't mean to interrupt." Tank looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the truck, pulled a scanner from the cart beside him and ran it, looked at the codes. Then he looked at her again. "Crank sensor," he said quietly. Not to the man in the suit, to himself. He looked at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet, something between recognition and recalibration, like a man who had picked up a rock and discovered it was considerably heavier than it looked. He turned to the man in the suit. "I need to run a specific test on the crank sensor. Give me 45 minutes. The man in the suit looked at Emily, then at Tank. "Who is she?" "She works here," Tank said. He walked past Emily toward the tool cart, and as he passed her, he said under his breath, and without breaking stride, "Good call." 2 words. She held them in her chest like something breakable that she needed to carry carefully for the rest of the day. Ryder appeared at her elbow 20 minutes later. He wasn't looking at her. He was studying a clipboard. "Where'd you learn diagnostics?" he said. "Conversational, not a confrontation." "I don't know much," she said carefully. I watch and I read. I had a phone for a while and I used to look things up." She paused. "My mom had a car that was always breaking down. I used to try to figure out why." Ryder nodded slowly, said nothing for a moment. Tank used to say, he said, still not looking at her, that the best mechanics weren't the ones with the most training. They were the ones who couldn't stop asking why something happened. He set the clipboard down. He stopped saying it a while back. I think he forgot it was true. He walked away. Emily looked at the broom in her hands. She put it down, picked up the scanner Tank had left on the cart, looked at the codes on the screen, asked herself why. She didn't know it yet, but that was the exact moment the shape of everything changed. Outside the garage in the town that had warned her not to go there, people had started to notice. Small towns notice everything eventually. It is their single most reliable characteristic. And what this small town had begun to notice was a teenage girl, a blonde teenage girl, young, obviously young, going in and out of Blackstone Garage each day. The conversation started the way they always do, in the way of someone saying something idle to someone else idle, the kind of half-formed sentence that is less an observation than a signal. "Did you see there's a young girl working over at Blackstone, and from there the way water finds a slope? She can't be more than 16. Well, you know those men. Somebody should look into that." Emily didn't know about the conversations yet. She was in the back room of the garage on the cot she had come to think of as hers, with a manual on fuel injection systems that Ryder had left wordlessly on top of the refrigerator sometime in the past few days. She was reading. She was asking why. And outside, the world was beginning to circle them. The fuel injection manual had 62 pages, and Emily had read 47 of them by the time the garage opened the next morning. She hadn't planned to stay up. She told herself she would read 20 pages and sleep. But the thing about understanding, real understanding, the kind where something that was previously noise becomes signal, was that it had its own momentum. One answered question produced 3 more questions, and the 3 questions pulled her forward the way a current pulls you before you've decided to swim. She had her phone propped against the wall beside the cot, the screen at minimum brightness, cross-referencing what she read with diagrams she found online. The fuel system connected to the ignition system, connected to the sensor array, connected to the ECU, and the ECU was essentially the nervous system of the whole thing, receiving signals and making decisions based on data that could be corrupted at any single point in the chain. A bad sensor didn't just give a bad reading, it gave a false reality. The whole system responded to something that wasn't true. She thought about that longer than was strictly necessary for the purposes of understanding car repair. When Tank came in the next morning and found her already in the second bay manual closed, watching Ryder work on the transmission he'd been fighting with for 3 days, he stopped in the doorway. "You read all of it," he said, looking at the manual on the workbench. "Most of it." And she hesitated. The crank sensor diagnosis yesterday, the downstream effect on timing the false lean code, it would have shown up differently if the timing sensor itself had failed. The error sequence would be reversed. Leading indicator versus trailing indicator. Tank was quiet. "You figured that out from the manual." "The manual and some cross-referencing." He picked up the manual, turned it over, once in his hand, set it back down. "There's another one in the cabinet. Electrical systems. Take it if you want it." He walked to his bay. The conversation was over. That was how Tank operated. He gave you exactly what you'd earned and didn't editorialize around it. The electrical systems manual was already sitting on top of the cabinet like he'd put it there sometime that morning before she'd arrived. She picked it up, went back to sweeping. The day the first car owner asked her directly for an opinion, it was an accident. A woman named Cheryl 50s harried the particular exhaustion of someone managing too many things with too little time, had brought in a sedan that was pulling hard to the right. Grizzly was in the middle of something that couldn't wait, and Tank was on the phone. Ryder was under a different vehicle and technically available, but hadn't emerged yet, and Cheryl was standing by the front counter looking at her watch with the expression of someone who has already recalculated their schedule twice. Emily was passing through with a trash bag. Cheryl looked at her. Excuse me, do you work here? I clean. The mechanics are... I know they're busy, I can see that. Cheryl pressed her lips together. Can you just tell me? My car pulls right. Badly. A shop told me it was my alignment. I paid $200 for an alignment and it still pulls. Emily stopped. How long ago did you get new tires? Cheryl blinked. About a month before the alignment. Same shop. Yes. Did the pulling start before or after the tires? Cheryl opened her mouth. Closed it. After. Now that you mention it, right after. Emily set the trash bag down. Can be a defective tire internal belt shift. The alignment corrects for it temporarily, but as the tire rolls, it reasserts the pull. It's a manufacturing defect, not an alignment issue. The tire shop would be responsible, not your mechanic. She paused. You'd want a professional to confirm that, but that's where I'd start. Cheryl stared at her. How old are you? 17. Cheryl looked at her for another long moment. Then she looked at the car. Then she looked back. Is there somewhere I can write down what you just said so I can tell my husband? Because he's been insisting it's the steering rack, and I've been telling him that makes no sense. Grizzly heard the tail end of that conversation. He said nothing about it directly. That was not his style. But that afternoon, he appeared at the workbench where Emily was eating lunch and set down a binder that had seen better decades. The cover was gone, the spine was held together with electrical tape, and the pages inside were a mixture of printed diagrams and handwritten notes in at least 4 different styles of handwriting. Field diagnostics, he said. Things that don't show up in manuals because they're learned from actual cars behaving badly. Not my writing, mostly. Accumulated. She touched the binder carefully. Can I borrow this? Can't borrow something I'm giving you. He walked away, stopped, turned back. You diagnosed the crank sensor yesterday. Tank confirmed it. I know what you did. I was there. He studied her with the directness of a man who had never seen the point of looking away from things. Where'd you learn to think that way? I don't know, she said. When something doesn't work, I need to know why. I can't leave it alone. Grizzly nodded slowly. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite identifiable. That's either the best or worst quality a person can have, he said. Depends entirely on what they apply it to. He left. She opened the binder and started reading. Danny Brooks noticed around the same time as everyone else, but processed it differently. Okay, so here's the thing, he said, dropping into a chair across from her in the break area that afternoon. He had the tone of someone announcing they'd worked something out through careful deliberation. You are either some kind of automotive prodigy or you've been playing us all with a mop as cover, and I genuinely cannot decide which one is more impressive. Emily looked at him. I just read. People read cookbooks. Doesn't make them Michelin chefs. He tilted his head. Where were you before this school, parents? What's the actual story? The question landed without malice, but with precision. She felt the old reflex, the retreat, the deflection, I'm fine, that covered everything. She said, parents are gone, school stopped working out. That's the short version. Danny absorbed this without making it a moment. Short version's fine, none of my business anyway. He leaned back. You know what Tank said about you this morning to Ryder? No. He said the girl thinks like a mechanic. Danny paused. I've been here 6 years. He said that about exactly 2 people. Ryder was one of them. She didn't know what to do with that. She looked at her food. For what it's worth, Danny said, standing up, I had you figured wrong when you came in. For the record. He picked up his coffee. That doesn't happen to me often. I find it annoying, but also sort of refreshing. He was already halfway out of the room. Danny, she said. He stopped. Thank you for the camping pad. A pause long enough to confirm he knew exactly which camping pad she meant. Don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he was gone. The whispers from outside the garage arrived the way most trouble arrived. Not all at once, but incrementally, each individual piece, small enough to dismiss the accumulation, harder to ignore. It started with a woman Emily didn't know who came to the garage on a Wednesday asking to speak to whoever was in charge. Tank came out. The woman who had the organized energy of someone who sat on committees and believed in the productive deployment of concern told Tank that several community members had expressed worry about the situation with the girl. What situation? Tank said. The young girl who works here, she appears to be quite young. There are questions about whether this is appropriate. She's 17. She has a legal work permit. He had sorted that out quietly, efficiently in the first week Emily had signed the forms, without knowing he'd already navigated the bureaucratic piece of it. She's employed in a cleaning capacity. She earns $40 a day and has standard working hours. Is there something specific you'd like to know? The woman looked at him. At the garage behind him, at the motorcycles along the fence. People are concerned, she said, about the environment. The environment, Tank repeated. His voice was level and gave nothing away. These men have reputations. I'm sure you understand the perception. Tank was quiet for a moment. I understand you drove up here in a Lexus to tell me that people are talking. He said it without heat. That's noted. Anything else? The woman left. Tank came back inside, didn't mention it to Emily directly, but she heard because the garage had imperfect acoustics and she'd been in the second bay with the door cracked and she'd heard every word. She sat with it for the rest of the day, the familiar weight of being someone that required explanation. The way concern could be deployed as a weapon dressed as care. She thought they're worried about her being here. They should be looking at where else she could go. The first real test came on a Friday afternoon, the kind of day that accumulated pressure, the way clouds accumulate before a storm. Nothing dramatic in any individual moment, but the barometric shift was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. A man Emily had never seen before came into the first bay, while Tank was in the office, and Grizzly was on a parts run. She was cleaning the back wall of the bay when she heard his voice and turned to find him standing close to Ryder's workstation, looking at the tools, looking at the bay, looking at the motorcycle Ryder had been restoring for a client. He was well-dressed in the way of a man who wanted you to notice. Good shoes, a watch that caught the light. The kind of grooming that required maintenance and a certain amount of investment, and the bearing of someone who was accustomed to the investment being noticed. Nice bike, he said, not to Ryder, into the air. Ryder looked up. Shops for service customers. You need work done? I was actually hoping to speak with the owner. He's available by appointment. The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't involve the eyes. I'm Marcus Webb. I have some business interests in the area. Thought it might be useful to introduce myself. His gaze moved around the bay and landed on Emily. Stayed there for a beat too long. I wasn't aware you had young staff. Ryder set down his wrench. He did it slowly, deliberately, and then straightened to his full height. He wasn't as large as Tank or Grizzly, but there was something in the way he shifted that changed the geometry of the space. Our staffing's not really a public matter, Ryder said. Of course, of course. Webb raised a hand, peaceful. Just making conversation. He looked at Emily again. How old are you, sweetheart? She felt every muscle in her back tighten. Old enough. Webb's smile widened slightly like she'd given him something. Independent. I like that. He looked at Ryder. Tell Mr. Hale I stopped by. I think we'd have a productive conversation. I have some interest in properties along this service road. He left. Ryder watched the door for 3 seconds after he was gone. Then he looked at Emily. You okay? Fine. Who is he? Trouble, Ryder said. He picked his wrench back up, but she noticed he didn't immediately go back to work. He was thinking. Stay out of his way if he comes back. Does he come back usually to places he visits once? Ryder thought about that. Men like that. Yeah, they come back. She told Tank that night. She knocked on the office door, which she had never done before, and when he said come in, she stood in the doorway and told him plainly what had happened. What Webb had said, how he had looked at her, what he'd said about the property. Tank listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at something on his desk that was not the thing he was actually looking at. You did right telling me, he said. Ryder said he's trouble. Ryder's right. He looked at her directly. Marcus Webb has been trying to get control of properties in this section of the service road for 2 years. This garage is the last holdout. He's bought or pressured out everyone else. She processed that. So he's not just visiting. He's never just visiting. Tank's expression was difficult to read in the way his expressions often were, not because he was hiding things, but because the face was so accustomed to stillness That emotion moved through it subtly like weather changing behind glass. He's looking for leverage. And I'm the leverage, yeah. Tank met her eyes. A miner working at a garage run by bikers with a Hells Angels adjacent history. He said it the way you'd say a chess position out loud, describing the board, not the feeling about it. To someone looking for a story to tell, that's leverage. Emily was quiet. The familiar cold had come back, the calculation, the awareness of her own position in a situation she hadn't fully mapped. I can leave, she said, if that's what... Nobody said anything about leaving. His voice was flat, not angry, flat in the way that meant settled, decided, not open for renegotiation. Sit down, she sat. You came here with nothing, Tank said. You've been here a month. In that time, you correctly diagnosed 2 problems no one else in the Bay had caught. You've read 3 technical manuals voluntarily in your own time, and Grizzly gave you his accumulated field diagnostics binder, which he has never done for anyone. He let that sit. You are not a liability in this garage. You are not someone this garage is doing a favor for out of charity. You understand me? She didn't answer. I asked if you understand me. Yes, she said. Good. He turned back to his desk. Nobody is running you out of here because Marcus Webb thinks you are a useful problem. That's not how this works. She stood, moved toward the door, stopped. Tank, he looked up. Why did you hire me that first day? You didn't know anything about me. He considered the question the way he considered most things thoroughly without rushing it. I knew some things, he said. I knew you were alone. I knew you were scared and trying not to show it. I knew you came back after Darlene told you not to. He looked at her steadily. People who come back after they've been told not to, they've usually already been through the thing they're afraid of. Makes them harder to break than they look. She held that for a moment, turned it over. Thank you, she said. Lock your door tonight, he said, not because he expected anything to happen, because he was a man who dealt in specifics. She locked her door. The next week moved fast and hard, and contained inside it the kind of emotional compression that makes time feel different in retrospect. When you look back on a week like that, it feels like it held 3 weeks of living. Ryder started teaching her without calling it teaching. He would be working, and she would be nearby, and he would say things like, you see what I'm doing here? And she would say yes, and he would say, why does it matter? And she would answer sometimes correctly, sometimes not. And he would tell her where she was right and where she was wrong with the same economy of language he applied to everything. Grizzly got to the garage one morning to find her attempting with the manual and a degree of focused stubbornness that he would later describe to Danny as genuinely alarming. To trace an electrical fault in a vehicle, Tank had said, was beyond the afternoon schedule. The fault had been intermittent and therefore maddening, the kind of thing that disappeared when you looked directly at it. She had been at it for 40 minutes, systematically eliminating possibilities. Grizzly watched her for a while without speaking. Then he said, you're testing the right circuit, wrong end. She looked up. Start downstream. If the fault is intermittent, you find it faster by narrowing from where the symptom appears and working back. Going from the source forward, you'll chase it all day. He handed her a test lead. Here. She took the lead, repositioned. 3 minutes later, she found the fault, a micro fracture in a harness wrap, causing intermittent contact loss. She stared at it. Good, Grizzly said. The way he said it, the particular weight of it, meant more than the word. Danny appeared from the other bay, looked at the opened harness, looked at Emily, looked at Grizzly. Did she just... Yeah, Grizzly said. Danny shook his head slowly. Okay, he said. Okay. He said it like a man updating a file. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks after she'd first walked across the gravel lot, that she heard Tank on the phone in a way she wasn't supposed to hear. She was in the hallway outside the office. She had come to ask a question and had stopped when she heard his voice, not because she meant to eavesdrop, but because the quality of his voice stopped her. It had a controlled tension in it she hadn't heard before. I told you I know what he's doing, Tank said. He's not the first man who's tried to use paperwork as a wrecking ball. A pause. Because she's here legitimately. Every piece of paper is clean. Another pause, longer. What kind of complaint? The silence that followed that question was the longest. Labor violations. His voice didn't rise, it dropped. He called it in as a labor complaint. Emily stood in the hallway and understood with the cold clarity of someone who had been a problem before that the clock had just changed. She wasn't just a girl working at a garage anymore. She was a case number. She went back to the bay, picked up the broom, swept in careful, even strokes, and thought with a precision that surprised her about what she actually had to offer, not just to herself, but to them. What she knew, what she'd learned. What if it came to it, she could prove? She swept the bay clean and thought about evidence and truth and what happened when someone turned a person into a weapon without their knowledge. She thought, not this time. She wasn't running. The labor complaint arrived officially on a Monday morning, delivered by a county inspector named Gerald Pruitt, who had the apologetic manner of a man who knew he was being used but had decided that knowing it didn't exempt him from the obligation. He was polite. He was thorough. He asked for Emily's work permit, her hours log, her daily pay records, Tank's business license, proof of liability insurance, and documentation of the garage's compliance with minor labor regulations regarding breaks, maximum hours, and task restrictions. Tank produced every document without visible agitation, which Emily could tell from the way Pruitt kept glancing up. He had expected friction and was recalibrating in real time when he didn't get it. Emily stood at the edge of the office doorway and watched Tank lay paper after paper on the desk, with the methodical patience of a man who had spent years understanding that the best response to someone trying to catch you was to simply have nothing to be caught for. Pruitt reviewed everything, made notes, looked up once at Emily directly. "You're comfortable here. This is a voluntary employment arrangement." "Yes," she said. "No one has pressured you or made you feel unsafe." "No." Pruitt nodded, looked back at Tank. "I'll file my report. Everything appears to be in order." He capped his pen. "For what it's worth, Mr. Dale, I'll note the complaint appears to have originated from a third party rather than from the employee or a guardian. That context will be in my report." Tank said, "I appreciate that." Pruitt left. The sound of his car on the gravel was still audible when Danny appeared from the second bay. "Well," he said. "Clean," Tank said. "Obviously clean. We knew it was clean." Danny crossed his arms. "The point isn't whether we're clean. The point is that someone is spending money to file complaints they already know are going to come back clean. That's not investigation. That's harassment with paperwork." "I know what it is," Tank said. "So what do we do about it?" Tank looked at the empty doorway where Pruitt had been. "We document everything from this point forward. Every transaction, every hour, every interaction. We make the record so complete that the next person who walks in here with a clipboard goes home with nothing." Ryder said from where he'd been leaning against the wall listening, "He's going to escalate." "Yes," Tank said. "How far?" Tank picked up the stack of documents, tapped them even against the desk, and filed them precisely in the folder he'd pulled them from. "As far as he thinks he needs to." Marcus Webb had by this point become a shape that existed in the garage without being present. A pressure they all felt, a name that moved through conversations the way a weather system moves through a region, announcing itself by what it changes rather than by direct appearance. Ryder had done what Ryder did when something bothered him, which was to quietly gather information with the thoroughness of a man who believed that understanding a thing completely was the only way to deal with it. What he found over the course of a week spent making calls and reading public records assembled into a picture that was coherent and ugly. He laid it out for Tank on a Wednesday evening after the garage had closed with Emily present, because Tank had told her to stay, which she understood meant she was no longer being protected from the information. Marcus Webb had been acquiring properties along the service road for 3 years. His method was consistent. Identify a holdout, apply pressure through whatever channel was most efficient, code violations, permit, challenges, neighbor complaints, and wait for the holdout to calculate that fighting was more expensive than selling. He had done it 7 times on this road. The properties he'd acquired were sitting vacant, which meant he wasn't developing them yet, which meant he was assembling something larger. A package, something that required the whole road or close to it. Blackstone Garage was the last significant holdout. "He needs us gone," Ryder said. "Not just pressured, gone, which means the complaints get worse before they stop." "What's the escalation path?" Tank asked. Labor complaint was the entry point. Low risk for him, just irritation for us. If that doesn't move us, the next step is probably something with more teeth. A civil claim. Maybe something around the property itself, environmental zoning, something that requires response costs money even when you win. Danny said, and Emily. The name landed in the room with particular weight. And Emily, Ryder agreed. He looked at her directly. He came here and saw you. He's already calculated what you look like as a story miner, biker's history of this garage. He doesn't need the story to be true. He just needs it to be plausible long enough to cost us more than fighting him is worth. Emily had been listening to all of this with the still focused quality she'd had since the night she'd overheard Tank on the phone. She had moved through the past week in a state of cold clarity that she recognized from the worst of the months before the garage. Not fear exactly, but the heightened awareness that came when the situation became serious enough that emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. He's going to use me, she said. Not a question. He's going to try, Tank said. Then let's think about what I can actually do. She looked around the room. I've been here 6 weeks. I've watched every repair read, every manual you've given me, logged every diagnostic call in the notebook I keep. I have dates, I have the problems, I have what we found and how we found it. I've been writing it down because I wanted to learn from it. She paused. If he claims the garage is running illegally or unsafely, or that my work here is inappropriate, I can document exactly what my work here has been, every single day. The 3 men looked at her. Ryder said slowly, the crank sensor diagnosis is logged in the customer file, and the tire defect identification, and the electrical harness fault, and the 4 other things I've caught in the past 2 weeks. She kept her voice level. I'm not just a cleaning girl he can point to and make look like a problem. I'm a documented contributor to legitimate repair work conducted in compliance with... She stopped, took a breath. I'm sorry, I don't know all the legal language. You don't need to, Tank said. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. You need to keep that notebook current. Dates times what you observed, what you contributed, everything. I already do, he nodded once. Good. Danny said she's been building her own defense for 6 weeks without knowing she needed one. I needed it anyways, Emily said. I was building it because I wanted to know I was earning what I was getting. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Grizzly, who had been standing in the corner so still that Emily had half forgotten he was there, said, Webb doesn't know what she is. He thinks she's a vulnerability. He looked at Tank. That's his mistake. Oh, the attack came on a Friday night. Not metaphorical, not procedural, actual. Emily was in the storage room nearly asleep when she heard it, not a sound she could identify immediately, just a disruption in the baseline of the building's nighttime quiet. She sat up, listened, heard it again, something hard connecting with metal outside in the direction of the parking area. She was on her feet before she'd fully decided to be. She went to the door locked and, as Tank had told her, always locked from the inside, and pressed her ear against it. Voices. 2 of them. Male. Not the voices she knew. She heard Tank's voice then from somewhere outside, sharp and commanding. Then the sound of a physical confrontation, the specific acoustic signature of bodies in motion, impact the grunt of effort. She pulled her phone from the workbench, called Ryder because Tank had given her all their numbers in the first week and told her to use them without hesitation if something felt wrong. Ryder picked up on the second ring. Emily. Something's happening outside. I can hear fighting. Tank's out there. She heard him moving before the sentence was finished. Stay in the room. Door locked. Don't open it for anyone who doesn't say my name first. I'm 4 minutes away. The call stayed open. She sat on the cot with the phone against her ear and listened to Ryder's car starting, pulling out the sound of speed in the engine. Outside, she could still hear voices. They were angrier now, more fragmented, the kind of argument that's already become physical and is negotiating what comes next. Then she heard Tank make a sound she hadn't heard from him before, short, compressed, involuntary. The sound a person makes when something hurts them against their will. Ryder, she said into the phone, I think Tank's hurt. How long? Just now, I heard, she swallowed. He made a sound. 2 minutes, keep the door locked. She kept the door locked. She sat on the cot and held the phone and did not panic, because panic was information leaving the system and she needed her system intact. Ryder arrived in 1 minute and 40 seconds. She counted. He said his name at her door and she opened it, and he was already moving past her toward the outside, and she followed without being told to stay back, because she had already decided that staying back was not what this situation required. Tank was in the parking area. He was upright, which was the first thing she registered, and that registered as relief before anything else did. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding with the specific generosity of head wounds, and he was holding his right side with his left hand in the way of someone assessing whether a rib had moved. Two men she had never seen were being held, not physically, but by the quality of Grizzly's presence, which was apparently sufficient because Grizzly had materialized from somewhere and was standing between them and the exit with his arms crossed in an expression that communicated with perfect clarity that leaving was not a unilateral decision they got to make tonight. "I'm fine," Tank said before anyone asked. He said it to Emily specifically because she was looking at him with an expression she couldn't fully control. "You're bleeding," she said. "Head wounds bleed. I'm fine." He looked at Ryder. "Called it in. Cops are coming." Then he looked at Grizzly. "Those two aren't going anywhere." Grizzly didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there. Emily looked at the two men. They were young, early 20s, the look of people who had been hired for a specific task and were now recalculating the risk-reward analysis of the task in real time. One of them was trying very hard not to look at Grizzly. The other one was looking at the ground. "Who sent you?" Ryder said. Not a question, a statement with a rising edge. Neither of them answered. "Okay," Ryder said. He pulled out his phone. "Then you'll have a conversation with the police instead." "That's fine." The one who'd been looking at the ground said quietly, "We were just supposed to mess the place up a little. Not we weren't supposed to hit anyone." "Then why did someone get hit?" Grizzly said. His voice in that register was like something geological. The young man said nothing. Tank was looking at them with the expression of a man performing a very specific kind of calculation. He looked tired, Emily thought. Not from the physical altercation, from the longer fight, the one that had started the moment Webb had walked into the bay. "Were you paid?" Ryder said. The young man looked up, made the calculation. "Cash, half up front." "By who?" He hesitated. "By who?" Ryder said again. "A guy, nice shoes, watch." The young man shrugged miserably. "I don't know his name. We got a number and a time and an address, and that was it." Emily looked at Tank. Tank looked at her. Nice shoes, watch. They both knew. Blam. The police came and took statements and photographed Tank's face and the damage to two vehicles in the lot, mirrors broken. One hood dented, and took the two young men into custody on assault and vandalism charges. A detective named Calloway, who had the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have lost the capacity for surprise, took Tank aside and spoke to him for 15 minutes. Emily watched from inside through the bay door. When Tank came back in, she said, "Did you tell him about Webb?" "I told him everything I know, which is that someone paid two men to come here and that I have a neighbor with motive. The detective can connect the dots or not." He sat down on the workbench stool, which she had never seen him do. He was always standing. "Calloway's not a bad cop. He's a careful one." Ryder said, "Webb's careful too. We'll see who's more careful." Tank looked at the cut on his hand. He'd cut it on something during the altercation smaller than the head wound, but still seeping. He looked at it with a detachment that suggested it was the hand of someone else. "This escalates now. He sent people. That means the legal route alone wasn't going to be enough for his timeline. He's under pressure to close the acquisition." "Which means we're under pressure," Danny said. "Which means we're under pressure," Tank agreed. Emily said, "What do we do?" All four of them looked at her. She held the look without flinching because flinching was something she had burned through months ago, and what was left in its place was something harder and steadier. "What we do," Tank said, "is exactly what we've been doing. We document. We operate clean. We don't give him anything real to use." He paused. "And we start preparing for whatever comes next, because what comes next is going to be bigger than two guys with a parking lot job." She thought about that, about bigger, about what bigger looked like from where they were standing. She thought about the notebook in the storage room with 6 weeks of entries, about the customer files she could cross-reference, about every diagnostic, every conversation she'd been part of, every way she had contributed to this place's legitimate operation. She thought about what she actually knew. "Can I see the financial records?" she said. "The customer invoices, the repair logs, everything that documents the garage's business history." Tank looked at her for a long moment. Why? Because if Webb's going to make a legal case, it's going to require claiming something about this place that isn't true. And the best way to fight something that isn't true is to have documentation of what is true. So complete and so organized that his version doesn't have room to breathe. She met his eyes. I can do that. I'm organized. I'm detail-oriented. I have 6 weeks of experience watching how this place operates. Let me help build the defense. The room was quiet. Grizzly said, "She's right." Danny said, "Obviously she's right." Ryder said, "Tank." Tank looked at the floor, at his hands, at the cut that was still bleeding slowly, at Emily. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'll pull everything." She was up before anyone else the next morning. She had slept 4 hours, not because she couldn't sleep, but because 4 hours was what her system apparently needed, and then it was done with sleep and ready to work. She made coffee on the small machine in the break area and sat at the table with a fresh notebook and the pen she kept in the front pocket of her hoodie and wrote at the top of the page, "What we know, what we can prove, what we need." She was still writing when Ryder came in an hour later and stopped when he saw her. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I slept enough." She looked up. "Who's Webb's lawyer, do we know?" Ryder poured coffee, sat down across from her. "There'll be a firm, someone local who does commercial real estate. If he files a civil suit, what would he claim?" Ryder was quiet for a moment. "Something with damages, fraud probably, or misrepresentation. Maybe claim the garage has been operating outside its permitted scope." "Has it?" "No." "Then we can prove that." "What else?" "Could claim the employment of a minor constituted something actionable." "We have documentation proving compliant employment." "What else?" Ryder looked at her across the table, at the notebook, at the way she was holding the pen, not casually, but with the grip of someone who understood that what she was writing mattered. "You've done this before," he said. "Organized information under pressure." "I've survived under pressure," she said. "It teaches you to think in categories." He was quiet for a moment. "Emily," she looked up. "What happened to your parents?" She held the question, looked at it from the sides the way she'd look at a diagnostic problem. Then she said, "My mom died when I was 15. Heart, nobody saw it coming." She said it the way you say something you have said enough times that the worst of the weight has been worn smooth. "My dad was gone before that. I went into foster care. It didn't," she paused, "it didn't work out." Ryder nodded once. "The car," she said. "The Civic. It was hers. It's the one thing I kept." He didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that. Sorry was a word people said when they didn't know what else to do, with a silence, and Ryder was not a man who was afraid of silence. What he said was, "The car needs a full service, oil, filter belts, brake check. I'll do it this week." She opened her mouth. "Don't," he said. She closed her mouth. "You've been earning it for 6 weeks," he said, "and your mom's car should run right." She looked at the table, looked at the notebook, looked at the list she'd been making. She pressed her lips together and held everything still and then said, "Thank you." "Tell me what else you need for the list," he said. "I'll help you fill in the gaps." Sarah. The lawsuit arrived 11 days later, not through Callaway, not through the inspector. Through a process server who came to the garage on a Tuesday morning and handed Tank an envelope with the particular professional neutrality of someone whose entire job was to deliver things nobody wanted and not be present for the reaction. Tank opened it at his desk with Emily and Ryder standing in the office. He read through it once without speaking. His expression did not change. Then he set it on the desk and let them read. Marcus Webb, through his attorney, was claiming that Blackstone Garage had conducted repairs on several of his property's vehicles under fraudulent pretenses, billing for work not performed, misrepresenting the nature of repairs, and charging for parts not installed. He was seeking damages. The number on the page was large enough that Emily felt it in her stomach like a physical impact. But that wasn't the part that hit her hardest. The part that hit hardest was the paragraph that referenced the employment of a minor in a work environment that allegedly violated safety regulations conducted by individuals with documented criminal histories, creating what the filing called a pattern of disregard for legal and ethical standards of operation. She was in the lawsuit. Not by name, she was a minor employee, but she was there, as evidence, as color, as the thing that was supposed to make the picture Webb was painting look true. She stood and read it twice and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief and was most accurately described as the final death of surprise. She had known this was coming. She had been preparing for it. And still seeing it in legal language, seeing herself rendered into a phrase in someone else's argument, hit differently than the knowing had. She looked at Tank. He fabricated it, she said. The repair fraud. He fabricated all of it. Yes, Tank said. Can we prove that? Tank looked at her steadily, at the notebook she was holding, at the 6 weeks of documentation she had been building, without knowing, then building deliberately, then building with the focused intention of a person who understood that the truth without evidence is just a story. That's what we're going to spend the next few weeks finding out, he said. She looked at the lawsuit on the desk, at the number, at the paragraph that had turned her into a clause. She thought about running, gave the thought exactly 3 seconds. Let it finish. Then she said, tell me which files you need pulled first. The files took 3 days to pull and organize. Tank had records going back 11 years, invoices, parts, receipts, customer signatures, credit card transaction, logs, supplier delivery confirmations. The garage had always operated on paper for the things that mattered, not because Tank distrusted technology, but because paper was harder to alter retroactively and easier to present in a room where someone was trying to say, you'd done something you hadn't. He had kept everything. Not neatly, the organization was the organization of a working man rather than an accountant, which meant chronological, but not cross-referenced, thorough, but not indexed. Emily made it indexed. She worked at the back table from 6 in the morning and until the light outside changed to evening breaking, only when Ryder physically put food in front of her, which he did twice a day with the same quiet consistency he applied to everything. She built a cross-reference system in 3 notebooks, one for customer records, one for parts and supplier documentation, one for what she was calling the integrity log, which matched every repair claim in Webb's lawsuit against the actual invoice, the parts receipt, the customer's signature, and where available, the before and after diagnostic notes. The fraud claims Webb had filed were specific. 11 repair jobs over 2 years, allegedly billed for work not performed or parts not installed. It was specific enough to look researched, which was the point. Vagueness is easy to dismiss. Specificity has the appearance of legitimacy, but specificity is also falsifiable. Emily found the first hole on the second day. Webb's filing claimed Blackstone had billed for a full brake replacement on a vehicle registered to one of his property management companies, rotors, pads, calipers, the whole assembly, and that inspection of the vehicle showed the original components still in place. It was the kind of claim that sounded damning until you pulled the parts receipt from the supplier, showing delivery of the components on the date in question, the customer's sign-off showing the work completed, and this was the piece that made her sit up straight, a photograph taken by Ryder as part of his standard post-repair documentation practice, time-stamped and showing the new rotors installed. She held the photograph, looked at the timestamp. Ryder, she said, he came over. You photographed completed work. Started doing it 2 years ago when a customer disputed a repair. Tank said it was worth the extra 2 minutes. She looked at him. Do you have photos for all of the 11 jobs Webb cited? Ryder was quiet for a moment. Most of them, maybe 9 out of 11. Get them all, every one you have. He got them. 9 photographs. 9 time-stamped records of completed work that Webb's lawsuit claimed had never been done. She laid them out on the table in a row and looked at them and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing clicking into place. Not joy exactly, but the clean, specific feeling of reality asserting itself against a lie. She went to Tank's office. He didn't check your documentation, she said. He built the fraud claims assuming your records would be incomplete. He didn't know about the photographs. Tank looked at the photograph she'd set on his desk, picked up one, set it down. 9 out of 11, she said. The other 2 we can reconstruct from supplier delivery records and customer signatures. The documentation is there. It just needs to be assembled. Tank was quiet for long enough that she started to wonder if she'd missed something. Then he said, when I hired you, I thought I was doing you a favor. She didn't respond. I was wrong about the direction, he said. Sayun. The lawyer Tank retained was named Patricia Osei, a woman in her 50s with the compact, deliberate energy of someone who had been underestimated professionally enough, times that she'd stopped being surprised by it and started treating it as a tactical advantage. She had been recommended by someone Tank trusted, and she had taken the case after a single meeting, during which she had read through Emily's cross-reference notebooks with the focused attention of a person who recognizes organized intelligence when she sees it. "Who prepared this?" she'd said, looking up. "She did," Tank said, nodding at Emily. OC had looked at Emily for a long moment. "How old are you?" 17. "Do you understand what you've built here?" A cross-referenced evidentiary record organized to correspond directly to each specific claim in the plaintiff's filing with primary source documentation for each point of dispute. Osei had looked at Tank. Tank had said nothing. Osei had said, "I need 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks were the longest Emily had experienced since the worst of the months before the garage, and they were also paradoxically the most purposeful. The difference between the two kinds of hard, the hard of surviving alone with nothing and the hard of fighting with people beside you, was something she had not fully understood until she was living inside the comparison. She worked. Everyone worked. Ryder spent 4 days contacting every customer whose vehicle appeared in Webb's lawsuit, explaining the situation and asking whether they'd be willing to provide a statement confirming the work had been performed as billed. 8 out of 9 said yes immediately. The 9th said he'd have to think about it and called back the next morning. 9 customer statements, each one confirming that the repair they'd paid for had been completed to their satisfaction. Grizzly handled what he called the supply chain, which meant calling every parts supplier the garage used and requesting formal documentation of every delivery corresponding to the dates in question. He was on the phone for the better part of 3 days. He was not a naturally patient man on the phone. His communication style required physical presence to land properly, but he was persistent in the way of someone who has decided a thing matters. And by the end of day 3, he had supplier confirmations for every parts order Webb had claimed were fabricated. Danny did what Danny did, which was reconstruct timelines. He had a memory for sequence, the order in which things happened, how long things took, who was present that functioned like a recording device. He sat with Emily every evening and walked through each job Webb had cited, pulling from memory the specific details of each repair, who'd brought the vehicle, in what condition it was, in what they'd found, how long it took, who'd signed off. He was precise and he was fast, and he cross-referenced his memory against the written records with a rigor that surprised her because Danny's public persona was one of easy deflection, and she hadn't fully seen the version of him that took things seriously. "You're different when it matters," she said to him one evening. "Everyone is," he said, not looking up. "The question is what it takes for things to matter." "What does it take for you?" He thought about it. "People I care about being wrong," he said. "That does it pretty reliably." She looked at the timeline he'd reconstructed, at the detail and precision of it. "Danny, yeah. Why are you all here? At this garage, I mean. Ryder, Grizzly, you. Why this place?" He set his pen down. First time she'd seen him do that voluntarily during a work session. He looked at the table for a moment. "Ryder did a stretch," he said. "Assault charge. It was more complicated than the charge made it look, but the record's the record. Tank gave him a job when nobody else would. Grizzly had a business that went under, wasn't his fault, but fault doesn't matter much when the debt comes due. Tank had history with him, helped him land on his feet." He paused. "Me, I burned a career I'd spent 12 years building over a decision I'd make the same way again. Tank knew me from before. He said, 'Come work,' so I came." She absorbed this. "He builds things," she said. "He builds places where people can land," Danny said. "Yeah." He picked his pen back up, "Which is why we're not letting Webb take it." The night before the first court hearing, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay on the cot in the storage room. Her storage room, the space that had become so thoroughly hers that she'd stopped thinking of it as borrowed and stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that could go wrong. This was not useful thinking, she knew, but it was the kind of thinking that finds you in the dark hours regardless of utility. She was thinking about the paragraph in the lawsuit, the one about the minor employee, the one that had turned her into an argument. She thought, what if the documentation isn't enough? What if Webb has something else, something they haven't anticipated? What if Osei goes in there and it's not as clean as the notebook suggests? She thought about the Civic in the parking lot, about $11 and a slow-leaking tire and $40 a day, and a sandwich in a toolbox drawer that wasn't really about the sandwich. She thought about what it cost to trust people after you'd learned not to. She got up. She couldn't lie still anymore. She went to the break room and made coffee and sat at the table with a mug and the third notebook, the integrity log, open in front of her, not to read it, but to have it near. Proof physical and organized that the truth was documented. Tank found her there at 2:30 in the morning. He came in without apparent surprise, poured himself coffee, sat down across from her. He looked at the notebook, at her face, at the coffee she'd been drinking long enough that it had gone cold. He said, "You should sleep." "I tried. Try harder." She almost smiled. "What if it's not enough tomorrow?" "It's enough," he said. Osei knows her business. "What if Webb has something we don't know about?" Tank looked at his coffee. "Then we deal with what he has." "How can you be that calm?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I've been in worse positions with less, and because I'm not doing this alone." He looked at her directly. "Neither are you. You understand that." She held his gaze. "I keep waiting," she said, "for the part where this stops being real. Where you tell me the actual conditions, where I find out what this actually costs." Tank set his mug down. "It cost you 6 weeks of work and a lot of notebook pages," he said. "That's the bill. You've paid it. That's not enough for what you've given me. I didn't give you anything you didn't give back twice over." His voice was level and left no room for argument. "The diagnostic work alone has saved this garage more in avoided misdiagnoses than your wages add up to. You know that. I know you know that because you've been doing the math." He stood. "Go sleep. Tomorrow matters, and you need to be clear." She looked at the notebook. "Tank." He stopped. "If it goes wrong tomorrow," she said, "if Webb wins somehow, you could lose this place." "Yes. And you're still Emily." He said her name the way someone says a word they mean exactly. "Go sleep." She went. She slept 5 hours and woke up clear. Open. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected and more formal than anywhere she'd been in her life. She sat behind the defense table beside Ryder and Grizzly and Danny, all of them in the clothes they wore when the occasion required it, not suits exactly, not these men, but the particular effort of men who understood when something demanded more than their defaults. Osei had prepared her for what to expect. Procedural first mostly. The hearing today was preliminary, establishing the record-submitting documentation beginning the evidentiary phase. An actual judgment could be weeks away. But today mattered because today was when Webb's attorney presented the specific claims and Osei responded with their documentation, and the shape of the case would become visible to the judge. Webb sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a man named Garrett, who had the smooth, preemptive confidence of someone who had won similar cases by the weight of paperwork rather than the weight of evidence. Webb was in his good suit, watch catching the light. He did not look at Tank. He looked at his attorney with the expression of a man who has already spent the money he expects to receive. Emily watched him and felt nothing complicated. The thing about spending 6 weeks building a document that proves someone was lying was that by the end of it, the person felt less like a villain and more like a problem to be solved. Webb was a problem. They had the solution. The math was going to work. Garrett presented the claims with the practiced fluency of someone who had rehearsed. 11 fraudulent repair billings, damaged amounts, the pattern of alleged misconduct, the minor employee situation as contextual evidence of operational disregard. Each point landed in the room like something solid. Then Osei stood up. She was quieter than Garrett. She didn't build anything. She simply started placing documentation on the record with the methodical calm of a person who knew that what she was putting down was better than what she was responding to. 9 photographs, time-stamped, showing completed work on the specific vehicles Webb had cited. 9 customer statements, confirming the work. Supplier delivery confirmations. 11 deliveries, 11 dates matching 11 jobs. Emily's cross-referenced integrity log entered as a supporting exhibit. The labor compliance documentation for Emily's employment, comprehensive, clean, every requirement met and documented. And then the final piece which Osei presented without drama or flourish because it didn't need either. Ryder had found it on day 9 of the 2 weeks. Webb's property management company had filed the vehicles in question for their own insurance claims 18 months earlier. The claims had cited the vehicles as having worn brakes and unserviced components, the same components that Blackstone Garage had allegedly billed for replacing without replacing. except the insurance claims had been filed after the dates of the Blackstone service records, after the work had been done. Webb had claimed against his own insurance company for worn-out components that had already been replaced by Blackstone, which he had paid for, and then claimed as evidence of fraud. He hadn't just fabricated claims against the garage, he had committed insurance fraud in the process. The room changed when Osei put this on the record. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, but the quality of attention shifted the judge's posture the way Garrett's hand stopped moving on the legal pad in front of him, the particular stillness that falls over a room when something true arrives. Emily felt it. Ryder felt it. She could tell from the way he exhaled slowly beside her. Grizzly said nothing and showed nothing, but she saw his hands relax on the table in front of him. Danny made a sound that wasn't quite a sound, the suppressed version of something that wanted to be satisfaction. Garrett asked for a recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. During those 15 minutes, Garrett had a conversation with Webb that Emily could not hear but could see from across the room. Webb's composure did not break exactly, but it lost its certainty, the specific quality of a man who had believed he controlled the board, discovering that the board was not the board he thought it was. When the recess ended, Garrett made a motion. The case was being withdrawn, not reduced, not restructured, withdrawn. Webb was going to have considerably larger problems than an uncooperative garage on a service road. They walked out into the afternoon and stood in the parking area, and nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Danny said, Grizzly made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she'd heard from him, and Ryder put his hand briefly on Emily's shoulder, just a touch, just a moment, and then gone. Tank looked at all of them, at the building behind them, at Emily, who was standing slightly apart from the group processing. "Let's go home," he said. She heard the word, the specific word he'd used. She heard it land inside her somewhere deep and settle there like something that had been looking for that exact place for a long time. She walked back to the car with the rest of them and said nothing because there wasn't a word big enough for what she was feeling, and she'd learned in the past weeks that the people she was walking with understood that silence sometimes meant fullness rather than absence. The week after was quiet in the way things are quiet after pressure releases, not empty, but rested. The garage ran, customers came, work happened. The rhythm that had been disrupted by 3 weeks of legal preparation reasserted itself, and with it came a specific relief that Emily recognized as the feeling of a life returning to what it was supposed to be. Except that what it was supposed to be had changed. Osei called Tank 4 days after the hearing to inform him that the county prosecutor's office had opened an inquiry into Webb's insurance filings. Calloway called 2 days after that to say the 2 men who'd been paid to damage the lot had given full statements, names, numbers, communication records. Webb's careful distance from the actual events had turned out to be less carefully maintained than he'd believed. Webb was not Tank's problem anymore. Webb was considerably larger institution's problem. Emily heard all of this from Tank in his office where he'd asked her to come sit. He delivered the information plainly without celebration, which was his way. She listened. When he was done, she said, "It's over." "The Webb part is over," he said. "The rest is just forward." She looked at him. "What does forward look like?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the desk drawer and took out a folder. Set it on the desk between them. She looked at the folder, looked at him. "Open it," he said. She opened it. Inside was a document she didn't immediately understand formal legal language. Her name appearing in it in a way that took a second read to process. "What is this?" she said. "GED program enrollment," Tank said. "Automotive Technical College application part-time program compatible with work hours." And he pointed at the third page. "A formal employment contract, not cleaning, junior diagnostic technician, hourly rate benefits where applicable with a provision for partnership review at 18 months. She stared at the pages. "You already filled this out," she said. "Osei drafted it. You sign it." Tank. "You diagnosed 3 faults this week that saved us 2 misdiagnoses and a callback. You built an evidentiary record that beat a lawsuit. You read 4 technical manuals in your own time and retained them well enough to apply them under pressure." He looked at her steadily. "This isn't charity. This is me correcting my job title for you." She looked at the contract, at her name on it, At the thing, it meant not just work, not just $40 in a safe room, but a trajectory, a direction, something that aimed at a future rather than just at tomorrow. I don't know what to say, she said. Say yes or no, he said. Take a day if you need it. She looked at the pages for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, do you have a pen? He handed her one. She signed her name slowly, deliberately, the way you sign something you intend to mean, and set the pen down and pushed the folder back across the desk. Tank looked at the signature, picked up the folder, filed it in the drawer with the same precision he gave every document that mattered. Welcome to Blackstone, he said. She thought about the index card on the telephone pole. Help wanted, cleaning, daily pay, ask for Tank. She thought about sitting in the Civic in the Dollar General lot with $11 and a slow leak in a notebook with 3 names left on it. She thought about walking across the gravel for the first time with her hands shaking and her chin up. She said, I already was. The contract sat in Tank's drawer and Emily's name sat on it, and for the first 3 days after signing it, she kept expecting something to undo it. That was the honest truth of what trauma does to a person's relationship with good things. It makes them provisional. Every piece of solid ground gets tested by the part of your brain that has learned through accumulated evidence that solid ground has a way of becoming something else without warning. She would be working and feel the specific weight of the signed contract existing in the drawer and think, but what if? And then she would have to consciously dismantle the what if, because the what if was not information. It was scar tissue. She worked on dismantling it the same way she worked on everything else, methodically with attention and by staying close to what was actually true. What was actually true was this: she was a junior diagnostic technician at Blackstone Garage. She had signed a contract that said so. She had a room with a lock and a key and a bottom shelf in the refrigerator, and 4 men who had demonstrated through action rather than language that she was not going anywhere she didn't choose to go. She enrolled in the GED program on a Tuesday morning, sitting across from an intake coordinator named Mrs. Flores, who looked at her and said, "You've been out of school for how long?" "About 8 months. And you're enrolling because I'm going to automotive technical college and I need the credential first." Mrs. Flores had looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating an expectation. Most students your age who've had interruptions to their education come in with more ambivalence. "I don't have time for ambivalence," Emily said. "What's the fastest path to the exam?" Mrs. Flores smiled for the first time. "I think we're going to get along fine, John." The GED program met 3 evenings a week. The technical college application required transcripts, which required Emily to contact her last school, which required a phone call she put off for 4 days, because the last time she'd spoken to anyone from that school had been during the worst period when she'd been in the foster placement that didn't work, and the school's response to her situation had been a form letter about attendance requirements. She made the call from the storage room on a Thursday evening. She held the phone and dialed and stood with her back against the wall, the way she stood when she needed something solid behind her. The registrar's office was bureaucratically efficient and emotionally indifferent in the way of institutions, which was actually easier to deal with than either warmth or hostility. She explained what she needed. They told her the process. She followed the process. The transcripts would be available in 10 business days. She hung up and stood in the room for a moment. Then she said out loud to no one, "Okay." That was all. Just okay. But the way she said it was different from the way she'd said the same word 8 months ago in a Dollar General parking lot. The same word carrying different weight, different meaning, because the person saying it had become someone different. Ryder finished the service on her mother's Civic 2 weeks after the court hearing. He didn't announce it. He just came to find her in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon where she was cross-referencing a diagnostic code and against the electrical systems manual and said, "Come here a minute." She followed him to the far bay. The Civic was there, lifted, looking more itself than it had in months. New oil, she could tell from the smell. Belts she didn't know the history of had been replaced. The slow-leaking rear tire was gone, replaced with a matching used tire in sound condition that Ryder had sourced from somewhere and said nothing about. She walked around it once, slowly. "Brakes," she said. "Front pads were down to 20%, replaced. Rear were okay." He paused. "Battery was borderline, replaced." Ryder, parts cost is logged. You can pay it off over time, it's not urgent. He looked at the car the way he looked at completed work, with the satisfaction of a man who finds meaning in things functioning the way they should. It'll run right now, the way it should have been running. She put her hand on the roof of the car. On the metal her mother had driven, the car she'd slept in for 4 months, and which had been the only thing she'd kept when everything else was gone. She said she would have liked you. Ryder looked at her. My mom, she said. She would have liked all of you, actually. She liked people who did things rather than talked about things. Ryder was quiet for a moment. She sounds like she raised someone worth knowing. He said, Barbara, shame. Better be saying it then. Emily looked at the car, at the new tire, at the things that had been fixed by someone who understood that her mother's car, running right, mattered for a reason beyond transportation. Thank you, she said. I know you're going to tell me not to say that. I was, he admitted, but go ahead. The first GED practice exam came back with scores that surprised Mrs. Flores considerably more than they surprised Emily. Math at 91st percentile, reading comprehension at 94th, science at 88th. The only area requiring real work was the extended writing section, not because she couldn't write, but because the format was specific and she hadn't learned its conventions. You've been educating yourself, Mrs. Flores said, looking at the scores. I've been reading, Emily said. This is more than casual reading. Emily thought about the fuel injection manual at 47 pages in the middle of the night, about the electrical systems manual, about Grizzly's accumulated field diagnostics binder, about the hours she'd spent cross-referencing information because she couldn't leave a question alone. I needed to understand things, she said, so I found out how they worked. Mrs. Flores made a note. With focused prep on the writing format, you could sit the actual exam in 6 weeks. 5, Emily said. I learn faster with deadlines. Mrs. Flores looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. 5 weeks, she said. All right. The twist that came in the 5th week was one nobody had anticipated, and it arrived not as a crisis, but as a phone call that Tank took in his office on a Monday afternoon, and then came to find Emily in the second bay with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. That was Patricia Osei, he said. Emily set down the scanner she'd been using. What happened? Nothing bad. He paused. Webb's insurance fraud case has been picked up by the county prosecutor. In the course of the investigation, they have been reviewing his property acquisition pattern on this service road. 2 of the properties he acquired, the ones before ours, the owners are now saying they were coerced. Misrepresentation of zoning changes that didn't exist. False claims about environmental violations that were fabricated. He stopped. They're building a larger case. Osei says it's likely Webb goes to trial on multiple counts. Emily processed this. That's not what I expected. No. I expected him to walk away to the next property on the next road. So did I on it, Tank said. Turns out the documentation you built the cross-reference of his fraud claims against our records, that's now part of a larger evidentiary picture. Osei says the prosecutor found the integrity log particularly useful as a template for how to structure the comparison of Webb's claims against verifiable records. She stared at him. My notebook. Your notebook, he said, is being used by a county prosecutor's office. She sat down, not because she was overwhelmed, but because sitting seemed like the appropriate response to the specific feeling she was having, which was the feeling of something you did for one reason, turning out to matter for a reason you never imagined. I made that notebook to learn, she said, to track what I was understanding. I know why you made it. It was just me trying to prove to myself I was earning what I was getting. Tank sat down across from her. Emily Edessa, he said, that's what all the best work is. People doing things to prove something to themselves and it turning out to matter more broadly. She looked at her hands, at the calluses forming on her palms from work she hadn't done 2 months ago, but now did every day. Webb's not going to be able to do this to anyone else, she said. Not for a while, Tank said. No. She looked at him. Good, she said, and meant the way you mean something when it comes from the bone rather than the surface. She sat the GED exam at the end of the 5th week. She went alone, which she decided deliberately because this was the part she needed to do by herself. Not because she couldn't have asked Ryder to drive her or Danny to make a joke that would have relaxed the nerves she could have, and they would have without question, But she needed to walk into that room as herself, not as someone with backup. She needed to know that she could. She drove her mother's Civic. It ran perfectly. The exam took 4.5 hours. She used all of it. Not because she was struggling, but because she checked everything twice, because she had learned that checking twice is not a sign of insecurity, but of rigor. And rigor was a habit she'd built inside a garage, where the consequence of not checking was a car that failed someone on the highway. She drove back to their garage when it was over. She didn't know the results yet. Those would come in the mail. She went back to work because work was what the afternoon required, and she was someone who did what the situation required. Grizzly looked up when she came in. "How was it?" "Fine," she said. "Fine good or fine difficult?" "Fine and as in I did it, and I won't know for 2 weeks and I'd rather work than think about it." He nodded once, handed her a scan tool. "Bay 3, customer says it's hesitating at idle. Start from the top." She took the tool, went to Bay 3, started from the top. That was how she wanted it, normal. The exam is a thing she'd done, not a thing she was waiting on, because she'd done what she could and the rest was process. The results came on a Thursday, 12 days later. She opened the envelope in the break room alone before anyone else was in for the morning. She'd been awake since 5 and had made coffee and had been sitting with the envelope for 20 minutes before she opened it, which she recognized as the last remnant of the old fear, the one that said good things were provisional. She opened it, she read the scores, she sat with them for a moment. Then she went to Tank's office and stood in the doorway. He looked up. She held up the paper. He looked at the scores. His expression did not change, which was his way, but something in his eyes did the same, something she'd seen when she diagnosed the crank sensor the first time, and he looked at her like a man recalibrating a weight. "GED is done," she said. "I'm submitting the technical college application today." Tank nodded slowly. "Good." She turned to go. "Emily." She stopped. He reached into the desk drawer. She thought it was going to be the contract or another document because Tank communicated through paper the way other men communicated through conversation. But what he put on the desk was a key, single key on a plain ring. She looked at it. "What's this?" "Storage room next to yours is being cleared out," he said. "It's going to be a study room. Table proper light, reference materials. For the technical program." He paused. "And for anyone else who needs it." She picked up the key. It was warm from the drawer. "Anyone else," she said. "We've been talking," Tank said, "about what we do with the space we're not using now that web's not a factor." "Ryder had an idea. It was your idea first, actually, though you didn't know you were having it." "What idea?" "You said once to Danny that the garage felt like a place where people who'd been through things could land." He told me. Tank looked at her steadily. "We're going to formalize that. Structure, mentorship, young people who are where you were. Not charity, work and structure, and the same things you got, which is someone treating them like they're capable before they've proved it." She stared at him. "You'd be part of it," he said. "Not running it, you've got school and work, but part of it, because you're the proof of concept." She stood in the doorway and held the key and thought about the index card on the telephone pole, about Darlene saying you don't want to go there, about walking across the gravel with her hands shaking and $11 in her backpack and no reason to believe that what she was walking toward was anything other than another closed door. She thought about what it would mean to be the reason someone else walked across that gravel. "Yes," she said. The motorcycle came on a Saturday morning 6 weeks later, which nobody had told her about, which was the point. She heard it before she understood what she was hearing. Not an unfamiliar engine because she knew every engine sound in the garage now, but a specific sound that had a different quality, more deliberate, coming from outside. She went to the bay door. It was in the lot. A motorcycle she had never seen because it had not existed until recently, built from components over the past 2 months by 4 men who had done it in the hours before the garage opened and the hours after it closed, and had somehow managed this without her knowing, which was a logistical achievement given how much time she spent in the building. It was not elaborate. It was not showy. It was exactly what it needed to be. Well-built, functional, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are made with skill and attention by people who care about the outcome. On the gas tank in clean lettering was her name. She stood at the bay door and looked at it. All 4 of them were behind her. She hadn't heard them assemble, but they were there, Tank and Ryder and Grizzly, and Danny standing in the bay, with the particular quality of men who have pulled off something they're proud of and are waiting to see what happens. She turned around. She looked at Tank. "You built this." "We built this," he said. "I don't have a license." "Program starts next month," Ryder said. "I'll teach you." "I don't—" She stopped. Started over. "I don't know what to say." "You never know what to say," Danny said. "And you always say the right thing anyway. Give it a second." She looked at the motorcycle, at her name on it, at the thing it meant, not a gift exactly, not charity, but a statement. A declaration by four men who did not make declarations lightly, that she was here, she was theirs. She belonged to this place, and this place belonged to her. She thought about her mother, about the Civic and the peanut butter crackers and the notebook with homework assignments that had become a notebook with names, and then a notebook with diagnostic logs, and then a notebook that a county prosecutor used as a template. She thought about how far that was from where she'd started. She said she would have loved it. Nobody asked who she meant. They all knew. Grizzly made a sound that had more in it than he would have admitted. Ryder looked at the motorcycle with the expression of a man reviewing completed work and finding it sound. Danny said, "For the record, the Tank lettering was my idea. I want that acknowledged." And Tank looked at her with the expression she'd spent months learning to read, the one that moved through his face like weather behind glass, and said, "You didn't find a job when you walked in here. You found your place." She held that, turned it over, felt the weight of it, which was the weight of something true. She looked at the motorcycle with her name on it, at the garage behind her, the bays and the tools, and the bottom shelf in the refrigerator, in the study room with the good light and the key on her ring, and the contract in the drawer, and every manual she'd read, and every diagnostic she'd logged, and every morning she'd walked across the gravel, and every night she'd locked her door from the inside, and felt a wall between her and everything that had tried to break her. She looked at these four men who the world had written off before they'd finished writing. She thought about the teenager she'd been when she walked in, hands shaking, $11, the absolute bottom of what a person could have and still be standing. She thought about who she was now, and the girl who had been warned about the bikers, the girl no one had believed in, the girl who'd been used as a weapon and had turned herself into evidence, the girl who had shown up broken and been handed structure instead of pity, the girl who had learned to ask why until the answer became her future. That girl looked at the life she had built inside a garage the world had told her to avoid, and understood with the clarity of someone who had earned every inch of the ground she stood on, that she had never needed to be saved. She had needed to be seen, and the men the world had given up on had looked at her, really looked without flinching, without conditions, and had seen exactly who she was capable of becoming. That was the whole of it. That was everything. Emily Carter was 17 years old when she walked into Blackstone Garage with nothing. She was 18 when she signed a contract that made her part of it. She would be 22 when she became a full partner. And the town that had warned her never to go there would spend years trying to understand how a girl with $11 and a slow-leaking tire had walked into a den of supposed criminals and come out the other side as the best thing that had ever happened to all of them. The answer was simple, and it was the same answer it had always been. She came back after they told her not to. And people who come back after they've been told not to, they've already been through the thing they were afraid of. That makes them harder to break than they look. "Take it off," he said, and the girl stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Take the coat. I'm not asking." She was 17 years old, shaking so hard her teeth clicked together like a stuck engine, and she looked at him with eyes that had already given up. Ethan Cole had $37 in his wallet, a father's coat on his back, and exactly 0 reasons to stop. He stopped anyway. If this story already has you leaning forward, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. Now let's go. The cold that night in Billings, Montana was not the kind you complained about. It was the kind that made decisions for you. It got inside your lungs before you even opened the door, wrapped itself around your ribs, and squeezed until breathing felt like a negotiation. The radio in the break room at Kellerman's Auto and Repair had been running weather warnings since 4 in the afternoon, wind chill dropping to -22, black ice on every surface. The kind of advisory that used the words life-threatening without apology. Ethan Cole had heard all of it. He'd nodded at the radio the way you nod at something you can't do anything about, pulled on every layer he owned, and walked out into it anyway. He was 29 years old. He worked 6 days a week doing oil changes and brake jobs and engine diagnostics for a garage that paid him $14 an hour and expected 15 hours of work out of 12. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment off Broadwater Avenue where the radiator knocked all night and the landlord charged $900 a month and called it affordable. He had a truck that needed a new alternator, a phone with a cracked screen, and a father's coat. That coat was the thing people noticed. Heavy canvas exterior wool lining the color of oatmeal. 2 big patch pockets on the front that could hold your hands and half your dignity at the same time. His father, Raymond Cole, had bought it from a surplus store in 1987 and worn it for 23 years before arthritis took his hands and a stroke took the rest of him. Ethan had been wearing it for the 6 years since. It was not a fashionable coat. It was a warm coat. In Montana in January, that was not a small distinction. He left the garage at 8:14. He knew the time because he checked his phone right as he stepped outside and the cold hit him so fast his eyes watered. He had 4 blocks to walk to the bus stop, then a 12-minute ride, then another 6 blocks to his apartment. He'd done it 100 times. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every corner where the wind cut sideways, every overhang that gave you 3 seconds of relief before the gust came back. He made it 2 blocks before he heard it. Not a scream. A scream would have been easier to ignore. Your brain files screams under someone else's problem faster than you'd like to admit. This was something smaller. A sound like an animal that had stopped fighting and was just waiting. High-pitched and broken, coming from the narrow gap between a closed pawn shop and a dumpster that smelled like motor oil and wet cardboard. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there for 3 full seconds. The wind pushed against him. The cold climbed up under his collar. Every sensible part of his brain said, keep moving, call 911 from the bus. You're going to freeze, standing still. This is not your business. He stepped into the alley. She was wedged against the back wall, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself in a way that looked less like comfort and more like she was trying to compress herself small enough to disappear. She had on a hoodie gray thin, the kind you'd wear in October, not January. No gloves, no hat. Her hair was dark and loose and wet at the ends, frozen into stiff strands that didn't move when the wind came through. She was shaking so violently that Ethan could hear it, the small, rapid chattering of her teeth, the tremor running through her shoulders. He crouched down. Hey! Her head came up, and her eyes were wild and dark, and she shrank back against the wall like he was the worst thing that had happened to her, which, given the look of her, was saying something. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. He held up both hands. I'm just a guy. I work at the garage 2 blocks over. I heard you. She didn't speak. She just stared. How long have you been out here? Her mouth moved. Nothing came out. Can you talk to me? What's your name? Go away. Her voice was barely there, thin as paper cracked at the edges. Please, just go away. I can't do that. He wasn't sure why he said it that way. Not, I won't. I can't. Like it wasn't even a choice anymore. You're going to get hypothermia if you stay out here. Your core temperature's already dropping. I can tell by the shaking. You don't know anything about me. I know you're freezing. He paused. That's enough. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that stopped him cold, colder than the air, colder than the wind. She said it quietly with the exhausted flatness of someone stating a fact they'd already made peace with. If someone finds me, they'll kill me. Ethan didn't move. He held her gaze. His first instinct was to ask who, and his second instinct told him that asking who would get him nothing except her shutting down completely. So instead, he asked the question that actually mattered right now. Are they looking for you tonight? She hesitated. Then she nodded once. Okay. He exhaled. He sat down on his heels, not towering over her, making himself smaller. Then you can't stay here because this is the first place they'd look. And you can't stay outside because the weather's going to finish what they started. He waited for that to land. So we need to figure out something else. There's nothing else. There's always something else. He didn't know if he believed that. He said it because she needed to hear it. There's a diner 3 blocks east of here. Lou's, you know it? She blinked. The name registered barely, but it registered. It's open all night. Booths in the back. You get coffee, you stay warm. Nobody's going to ask you questions. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He had $37. He counted out 20 and held it toward her. "This'll cover you for a few hours. Coffee, food, whatever you need." She stared at the money. She didn't take it. "I don't—" Her voice broke. She tried again. "I can't go anywhere looking like this. Someone will call someone. Lou's not that kind of place. Trust me. I don't trust anyone." "Fair." He kept the money extended. "You don't have to trust me. You just have to take the $20. Another long pause. The wind howled through the alley and she flinched hard against it, and that flinch, that involuntary, helpless shudder was what did it. Ethan Cole stood up. He reached up to his collar and he started unbuttoning the coat. She watched him. "What are you doing? What does it look like?" "Stop. No, that's you can't. It's -20 outside." -22, actually. He shrugged the coat off his shoulders. The cold hit him like a wall, like someone had replaced the air with ice water. "Come on, stand up." "I'm not taking your coat." "Yeah, you are." He held it open. "Because you're 17, maybe 18 years old, you're in a hoodie in a blizzard, and you said someone's going to kill you. And I've had this coat for 6 years, and my dad had it for 23 before that, so I know it holds up." He paused. "Stand up." She didn't move. "Stand up," he said again, quieter this time, and something in the way he said it, not a command, not a demand, just a simple fact about what needed to happen next, got through to her. She stood up. She was taller than he'd expected, younger looking up close. There were tears on her face that had half frozen at the corners of her eyes, and her lips were the wrong color, and her hands, when she finally extended them, were shaking so hard she nearly knocked the coat out of his grip. He helped her into it. He buttoned the top 2 buttons himself because her fingers wouldn't cooperate. He pressed the $20 into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Lou's Diner, 3 blocks east. Stay in the back booth. Don't talk to anyone who comes looking for you." He stepped back. "You understand?" She looked up at him. For the first time since he'd walked into that alley, she really looked at him, like she was trying to memorize his face, like she was trying to understand what category of human being did something like this. "Why?" she whispered. He thought about that for a second. "Because it's cold," he said, "and because you needed it more than I did tonight." He turned and walked back out of the alley before she could say anything else. The cold that hit him without the coat was a different order of magnitude. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was active. It was aggressive. It pushed through his flannel shirt and his thermal undershirt and his jeans like they weren't there, went straight for his skin, found every nerve ending it could reach, and lit them up. He put his head down and he walked. He made it to the bus stop in 5 minutes. It felt like 30. His hands were inside his shirt, pressed against his stomach, and his teeth had started the same chattering he'd heard from that girl in the alley, and he stood under the shelter and told himself it was fine. It was 4 minutes to the next bus. He'd been colder than this, which was not true, but was a useful thing to tell himself. The bus was 7 minutes late. By the time it arrived, Ethan's fingers had gone from painful to numb, which he knew was not an improvement. He climbed on, slid his car, dropped into the nearest seat. The heat inside was overwhelming and wonderful, and his body responded to it with a full-body shiver that rattled his spine. The woman across the aisle glanced at him, no coat, visibly shaking, slightly blue around the fingers, and then looked away, which was a very human thing to do, and he didn't hold it against her. He rode the bus. He got off at his stop. He walked the 6 blocks. He made it inside his apartment before his legs gave out. He caught himself on the kitchen counter, stood there for a minute, breathing hard, waiting for his body to decide which direction it was going to go. The radiator was knocking. The apartment smelled like old coffee and engine grease. He turned on the hot water in the shower, got the temperature as high as it would go, and sat on the floor of the tub with the water running over him until his hands turned red and the feeling came back in his fingertips in a flood of pins and needles that made him hiss through his teeth. He lay awake that night, wondering if she'd made it to the diner. He told himself she had. She'd looked like a survivor, even half frozen, even terrified, even hollow-eyed and shaking. There was something in her that wasn't done fighting yet. He could usually tell the difference. He'd grown up around people who'd given up and people who hadn't, and she hadn't. He fell asleep around 2 in the morning and dreamed about his father's coat. 3 days. That was how long it took for Ethan's body to register its formal objection to what he'd done. The fever hit him the next morning, low grade at first, the kind you try to work through, then high enough by noon that his supervisor, Marcus, sent him home with the particular brand of annoyance that men who'd never been seriously cold in their lives reserved for people they thought were being dramatic. Take tomorrow off too, Marcus said, not making it sound like generosity. Ethan took tomorrow off, and the next day, he lay in bed with 2 blankets and a space heater running, and his phone propped on his chest, checking the local news with the specific anxiety of someone waiting for a story that might or might not appear. There was nothing. No reports of a teenage girl found dead in an alley off 2nd Avenue. No missing persons bulletin that matched. Either she'd made it somewhere safe or no one was looking in the right direction. He chose to believe she'd made it. By the 3rd day, he was upright, shaky pale $12 poorer at the drugstore on cold medicine, but upright. He went back to work on a Thursday morning that was still bitter cold, but 10 degrees warmer than the night in question, which felt almost balmy by comparison. Marcus gave him a look that said, "Try not to almost die again," and handed him a work order for a transmission flush. The morning was ordinary. The afternoon was ordinary. He did the transmission flush. He rotated 4 sets of tires. He changed a serpentine belt on a 2009 F150 while the owner stood nearby and offered unhelpful commentary about how they didn't make trucks like they used to. He was under the hood of a late-model Silverado at 3:47 in the afternoon when he heard the first engine. He didn't think anything of it. This was a garage.